Howdy folks, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and today for you I have a Bjorn's Mighty Thoughts video. A video was recommended to me tonight. I'm pretty sure I've actually seen it before. Titled Sherman versus Tiger. It was actually a short video that someone had taken from the Discovery Channel. Apparently the Discovery Channel did a video where they were talking about the Sherman tanks. It is a short video section. It's only about 5 minutes. Going to talk a little bit about it here, and basically there's so much misinformation that it's like, okay, I need to talk about this video because there's just quite a bit of misinformation in the video. I don't know what the researchers were doing or how good their researchers were. Apparently their researchers weren't very good. Because there's definitely stuff I picked out as being missed, which is really unfortunate because back when I actually did watch TV, you know, that invention called TV, I used to watch quite a bit of Discovery Channel. Always considered it as more of one of the educational channels next to History Channel before they worried about hunting Bigfoot. I guess a couple things to square away here. Give out my pedigree of my information here. Okay, I was an Abrams tanker, and that matters absolutely zero here. It's a Sherman. I'm talking about a Sherman tank, talking about a Tiger tank. It means nothing in the consistency of the two tanks I'm talking about. That being said, as a hobby, I do read a lot of articles. I do watch a lot of videos, and I do read a lot of books. This is only 2 of my tank books. I have another 6 upstairs in my bedroom, but I'm not waking my wife up to go get them. A lot of the guys I do watch, a lot of the videos I do watch are actually from tank experts, such as Nicholas Moran, the Chieftain. I will put a link in his video down below where he actually talks specifically about the myths of American armor, and that's mostly because he talks a lot about the Sherman, and basically that information goes with the research I've actually gained, research and knowledge I've gained over the years. So it's a good research or a good resource point because his resource is actually the National Archives, the U.S. military archives, where they did all the notation and testing and etc. Another one I'm going to put also is the Bovington Tank Museum YouTube channel, the Tank Museum channel, and that's because once again those guys are actually in the museums, and it's interesting because as part of this video they talk about the Sherman Firefly for a bit of it, and I believe it was David Fletcher actually had done a short tank chat video talking about the Firefly and generally what he thought about it, and there was some interesting things he had to say about the Firefly. So I will put a link to that video down below, as well as another channel to check out as well on YouTube for tank information, especially more modern tank information, is actually Red Effect. He does quite a bit of different videos, mostly pertaining to, as I said, modern tanks, as well as he's actually interviewed some tankers. He interviewed a Leopard 2 tanker. He interviewed myself. I'm an Abrams tanker. So I will put a link to that down below. Go check out Red Effect's channel. Like I said, a lot of tank videos. But anyway, folks, I'm actually going to take and dive on in here into this video and talk a bit about it and watch this. And I'll just pause it at points and kind of give my feedback of what may be wrong with this picture or the information that they're giving out. So just bear with me, folks, and hopefully I won't ass this up too badly.
Germany's Panzerkampfwagen 6, the Tiger. The Normandy campaign involved 7,000 tanks and changed the course of history. But which of these two was superior? We're going to settle the matter once and for all. But for the
Which of these two tanks were superior? Well, there's only one running Tiger in the world right now, and that's Tiger 131. Yeah. Okay, we'll get serious.
D-Day landings, Allied commanders needed a tank to take on the Tiger, and the Sherman was the best they had. And that...
Now, I do want to point out here, okay, because he brings up D-Day. They were going to use the Sherman. They were using the Sherman for D-Day. America used the Sherman 75 mostly because up until literally Europe, the Sherman 75 in the battlefield was actually working. We actually did have the Sherman 76 available at the time. We had various different models of the 76 as well as the E8. So we did have Shermans with 76 millimeter guns. We were not fielding them at the time. Partially, there was a concern of logistics, concerns of training. There was multiple concerns with fielding two different variants of the Sherman in the American Army. But that being said, we were not only relying on the Sherman 75, and it was decided at the time that basically everything that we were going up against, Sherman 75 worked. We were already encountering Panzers. We were taking out Panzers. We were already encountering Tigers. We'd already taken out Tigers with Sherman tanks. Up until this point, I don't believe we had encountered any Panther tanks. And that's actually what really changed. Now, at the time frame, it was believed that the Panther was a specialized tank like the Tiger. That needs to be thrown out there, too. While the Sherman was like the general purpose main combat tank of the American forces, and it was also used pretty widely by British forces as well as Russia and some other countries in there as well. The Tiger was actually a specialized breakthrough tank. There wasn't a lot of Tigers out there, let alone there wasn't a lot of Tigers on the western side of Europe. There was actually more Tigers on the eastern side in Russia than there was fighting up against the Allied armies.
That's why there was an enormous disparity in size and power between the two tanks' guns, not to mention the rounds they fired. Just look at these shells. This is the 75mm diameter round of the Sherman. Okay, that looks pretty scary, but take a look at this monster. This is the 88mm round that the Tiger fired. The damage caused by one of these was absolutely devastating.
Now, I do want to say, Discovery, I'll give them props for that there. They actually did a pretty good job by going, here's the 75, here's the 88. There's a big difference. So, just going to have to give them props for that one.
Short, the Tiger's gun was bigger and more powerful in every way, capable of destroying a Sherman. To keep the Sherman lighter, the Americans used much thinner armor. In fact, almost half the thickness of the Tigers. To show the difference this makes, we've come...
Okay, now there is a little bit of a caveat there with that. Yeah, the Sherman only had, it was roughly 2 inches of armor plating, or 2.5 inches of armor plating, give or take. But that being said, when you consider the two tanks, the Tiger really didn't have any sloping, and the front glacis plate of the Sherman was sloped. It was sloped, I believe, if I recall off the top of my head, a 55-degree angle. It may have only been a 50. But basically what that did was it actually made the front upper glacis plate of the Sherman actually as thick as the Tiger. And in some variants of the Sherman, especially the later variants of the Sherman, it would be thicker still. And I'm not talking about the Sherman Jumbo. I'm talking about the like the M4A3E8. That had a thicker glacis plate than, say, the M4A1. That being said, there was also field expedient variants of the Sherman Jumbo where they would literally take an M4A3E8 and they would weld another upper glacis plate on top of that glacis plate, the original glacis plate, doubling the thickness in the middle of the field. So that does need to be thrown out there that while, yes, the Sherman did have lighter armor thickness-wise, especially on the sides and the rear, the effective armor was actually much, I wouldn't say actually much better, but it was as good as the Tiger, if in not some cases better than the Tigers.
To an ordnance testing range on Salisbury Plain.
We've set up an experiment to replicate the effects of a direct hit from an 88mm round on the...
And see, this test right here really doesn't show it too well. But basically what you have is, because it's sloped, and actually that's not even as sloped as well as a Sherman's upper glacis plate. The slope does not look actually sloped back enough, in my opinion, even though the thickness of the plate looks about right. I'm only guessing here by watching a video. I'm not there with a measuring tool. I also don't know if that's actually the proper type of steel. That has to come into consideration as well. They might not actually, that might be a stronger steel. It might be a weaker steel. That's kind of one of those, who knows, could be face hardened steel. It might be just rolled homogeneous steel. Who knows? But as you can see, because the plate is sloped back, and wherever the round would impact, it would be thicker because of the sloping.
2-inch thick side armor plating of a Sherman tank. But the
I like
real
how,
story...
Oh, okay. I like how he said side armor. Okay, the side armor on the Sherman was not 2 inches thick, nor was it sloped either. So that was definitely, I think, a misstatement or mistake on his behalf.
Is the potential damage to the crew inside, represented by these targets.
These targets that are all lined up, and they're all made of cardboard. It looks good, though, trust me.
We've also set up high-speed video cameras to record the impact and show how well the armor stands up to the modern equivalent of a Tiger's deadly firepower. Take a look at this.
The modern equivalent?
Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, the effects are devastating. The armor plating's just too thin to withstand the awesome power from an armor-piercing round fired from a gun like the Tiger's 80.
Except for it wasn't an armor-piercing round, and it wasn't fired from anything like a Tiger's 88. Probably what would have served them better is if they actually would have sprung for the budget and got an American 90mm gun and fired an AP round out of that. And yeah, that can be done. There is people who own stuff like that. And like I said, it looked good for Hollywood. That being said, a crew inside, they wouldn't obviously be lined up like that. Finally, the last thing I would say is look at the battle reports out there, and even look at the Russian front. There was not many vehicles that could withstand the 88mm gun of the Tiger tank. I mean, the first mention of the Germans using an 88 that I can recall was in Africa, where the Germans were using 88s, flak 88s against Matilda tanks. And then the Tigers would be produced not just because of that, but also because of vehicles like the KV-1. In Russia, you could actually shoot a target 1,200 meters away, and with the Tiger tank, it could penetrate the 75mm thick slope of a KV-1.
It's punched straight through. And as for the crew...
That also did not look like an armor-piercing penetration. That kind of looked more like a heat round penetration to me, but
have sliced right through the crew.
Not an expert here.
Tiger tanks mainly fired armor-piercing shells, which would penetrate the
see, it
skin
looked like
of
an
the Sherman.
armor-piercing, but it's just
Then a hard metal
just the way the
core
hole
would
looks. The
bounce
hole
around
just
the
doesn't look
interior.
right for armor-piercing.
But stories of Shermans taking out Tigers with their comparatively small 75mm guns were few and far between. That wasn't.
Yeah, they were few and far between because, well, the Tiger tank in general was few and far between. I've stated that earlier. I think from the point of Africa through Europe to the end of the war, I think American forces only engaged Tiger tanks something like 4 times, 5 times. And that's debatable, actually, because the one time the Tiger tanks were loaded on trains. We'll move on.
Till a British innovation turned the Sherman into a tank that could challenge the Tiger head-on. The Firefly.
Oh, the Firefly.
Firefly was
The Firefly wasn't the first attempt to put a hole puncher on a Sherman, although it was definitely a rushed project. I believe actually the first attempt was we tried to put a 3-inch anti-tank gun into the Sherman. So there has been attempts to put a hole puncher in the Sherman tank since the Sherman tank, pretty much.
last-minute, desperate attempt to put a really decent gun into the Sherman tank. And the British had available the 17-pounder, which was more or less equivalent to the Tiger's 88mm.
Okay, now that was, let me pull that back a little bit. Now that was actually a very good showing of the 17-pounder. It was a towed infantry anti-tank gun. It wasn't meant to be thrown into a tank. I'm going to throw some things out here. The one thing to point out is, so we tried to put a 3-inch anti-tank gun into the Sherman, and it was considered unsatisfactory due to space. We also tried to put a 76 millimeter anti-tank gun. This was an earlier version of the S-76 into the Sherman tank as well, and that was also considered unsatisfactory. Now, that being said, while the 3-inch really wasn't designed to be put into a tank, the 76 millimeter was designed to be put into a tank. The breech block was smaller. It had a shorter recoil system, things of that nature. The problem was it was considered unsatisfactory in the turret because it took up too much space in the turret. Now, that being said, the 17-pounder is actually a bigger gun and has a bigger breech block and a longer recoil system. I can only imagine how hard it was to service that gun inside the turret. I mean, I know there was something about you have like the gunnery sight here and one crank handle's here and one's down here by the floor. I guess the loading was very difficult too. Under optimal conditions, they're saying it could fire 4 rounds per minute, which is actually quite slow comparing to even the 88 millimeter of the Tiger tank. I believe the Tiger was rated for 5 or 6.
Tiger's 88 millimeter. They tried to put it into the Sherman, found it wouldn't fit. And in the end, ingeniously, they got it fitted into the turret by doing a 90 degrees twist, and they were able to insert it into the rather smaller turret of the Sherman.
Well, there was a little bit more to it than that. Now, for the gun itself, yeah, it was mostly, we'll just tilt it 90 degrees and spoon it into the turret, which literally that's what they had to do, was spoon it in. But there was not all the Shermans, but a lot of the Shermans that had the 17-pounder. If you look at the turret cheek, you'll see one of the turret cheek may have a armor patch on the outside of the turret, on the right side. That's because they had to cut a hole in the turret so the gunner had room to operate the gun. And basically that's a patch covering the hole they had to cut out. The next thing they had to do was they had to move the location of the radio equipment. They essentially cut a big hole in the back of the turret bustle, and they added an armored box, and that's where they shoved the radio in at. The next thing they also did was removed the co-driver position, the bow machine gunner position. They put an armor plate over the bow machine gun spot, so that way that wasn't a weak spot. But then they turned that area into an ammo rack. Otherwise, it would not have really been able to carry any ammo because of how much space the gun took inside the turret. So there was actually quite a bit of work to convert a Sherman into a Firefly.
This is the Sherman as it was originally developed with a 75mm gun. This is the Sherman Firefly with a 17-pounder anti-tank gun.
The audio's a little off too, by the way.
Killer.
That ought to give them something to think about.
But it was too little too late. The Sherman Firefly was never built in big numbers, mainly because the Americans were reluctant to fit a foreign gun in their tanks. Only 1 in 4 British Shermans ever housed the Tiger-killing 17-pounder.
Okay, the reason only 1 in 4 Sherman tanks had the 17-pounder is because of how British doctrine was written. British doctrine with the Sherman tanks followed a lot along the lines of the American doctrine. The Sherman tank was designed with infantry support in mind. That being said, there was also issues here with the 76 as well. The 75mm Sherman was great for supporting infantry, mostly because of its high explosive charge with the high explosive round. The 17-pounder and the 76mm actually both had less high explosive compound in them, which actually made them not as effective for infantry support. It basically geared those tanks more towards being a tank killer than anything else, than actually being an infantry support vehicle. Now, that's not saying tanks supporting infantry is not also designed to kill tanks. They do kill tanks. Sherman 76, as I said earlier, killed Panzers. That was a tank that the Sherman 75 actually commonly ran into. Probably actually more commonly than anything else up until the European theater. And even when they got to the European theater, they were still running into Panzer tanks. Next thing is yes, America was reluctant to put the 17-pounder in the Sherman tank. Part of it was because of it being a foreign gun. We didn't want a foreign gun. We didn't want to rely on them to put guns in our tanks. Mostly it comes down to logistics. We also didn't want to have to worry about either getting ammunition from the British or producing ammunition ourselves. That being said, when they did the trials on the 17-pounder, they were considered unsatisfactory. This was at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, circa 1942, I believe. Maybe even, I'm pretty sure 42. Maybe 43. I don't know off the top of my head, but basically it just comes down to one of those things of the gun was considered unsatisfactory. There was multiple areas where the gun was considered unsatisfactory. One was crew comfort and crew serviceability inside the turret of the vehicle. The next part is actually the gun accuracy itself. While a lot of people out there makes the 17-pounder out to be this ultimate Tiger tank killing cannon, it really wasn't. Not in the Sherman anyway. It was very hard to use, and it threw the accuracy off. The optics really weren't all that great for the gun either, or it was hard to use the optics in the Sherman tank. That being said, the 17-pounder was also mounted in the British Archer as well as the Achilles. And the 17-pounder actually did perform pretty well in those vehicles. But that being said, those vehicles had turrets that were designed around using a larger gun, such as the 17-pounder. Actually, if I recall, the Achilles uses the turret from the M10, it was a modified turret of the M10, which would later be modified even more to make the M36 Jackson. So we could even fit a 90mm gun in that turret, which was something we didn't really want to try to do with the Sherman. That being said, it was the way the doctrine was written. The British also, they wanted to give the British armor units a hole puncher. And that was the solution, was the Firefly. But they didn't want to get rid of their armor support their infantry support capabilities as well. That's why they would have tank units of 1 Firefly and 3 Shermans. Also, the next thing to point out as well, kind of to go along with that whole caveat, is the Sherman Fireflies, and I don't believe they really show one here, but you can find plenty of photos online. They would actually, the British tank crews would paint the barrels of the Sherman Firefly to camouflage the barrel, because once the German tank crews became aware of the Firefly's tank killing capability, they would target the Firefly. The British didn't want whole units of rolling targets.
There were other areas where the Sherman was beginning to gain superiority over the Tiger. At almost twice the weight of the Sherman, the Tiger could only reach a top speed of 23 miles per hour. The Sherman was much faster and could go places the larger Tiger would just get stuck in.
There we go, folks. That's actually the end of the video right there. I'm just going to leave it at that. Wow, that turned 5 minutes into 25 minutes. So I'm going to wrap it up. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. Hopefully you learned something. But I learned actually something out of this. Don't believe everything you see on YouTube and TV. Sit down and do some research, folks. That's what this is all about. Anyway, folks, thank you very much for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. And have yourself a wonderful day.